to kick this off with the flutter sleeves, and instead of hemming the flutter sleeves, I am going to add this beautifully slim bias binding. Let's have a look at this real quick. You need to make sure that you have the shorter side of your bias binding facing up when you're stitching this, and then I'm stitching fairly close to the edge. I very often see it that people will top stitch almost in the middle of the bias binding, and then the flutter or whatever they're binding will pull out after a while. So make sure that you are very close to the edge. The bias binding always has a deeper edge on the underside, so it goes in a little bit more anyway, so don't worry that you won't catch it. Just put it in with your finger. I'm always using my fingernail just to make it glide in really nicely. There we go. Give it a good press. Great stuff. And then we're on to our next step already, and that is to put our gather threads into the edge. It looks absolutely beautiful. Love that bias binding. You can get that at Joann's here in America. I think slimmer bias binding looks nicer than wider stuff. You want to put in 2 stitch lines with the longest stitch available on your sewing machine. One close to the edge, and then the next one we're going to put foot width from that, so that when we have our centimeter seam allowance, it'll sit right exactly in the center of that. And we go again, and you will see in a minute I've got so many loops underneath it because I didn't check the tension, and I do have issues with tension on this machine. So flip it over when you do it, and if you have loops that I do, you should increase the tension a little bit. Now I'm going to iron the strap lengthways in half. And on the back we're going to have a neat edge, so you can iron that over. That's one option, and then just iron it again lengthways to hold it all in. Or we can actually sew that shut later on. So I'll show you both options, of course, so that you can learn something and say, oh, I like it like this or like that. Now I'm going to put my flutter sleeves on, right sides facing each other, and make sure that the front of your flutter sleeve is facing the front of the strap. So the front has got this little kink, and it's also the wider part of your flutter strap. And at the back it's slimmer. And we're going to start the back a centimeter in, so that we miss out the seam allowance, so that we get a beautiful result. And then we just pull the bobbin threads, which in my case was a little bit of a to-do because I had all these loops and it wasn't as tight as I would have liked it. So when I pulled it, it was a bit of a little nightmare, but okay. So you want to pull one end around a pin in a figure of 8, so those threads can't go anywhere, and then you just pull your bobbin threads until you've got them to the length approximately that you need for the whole thing. And my sort of way I do it is that I pull it so it's a little bit smaller, and then I put it on the end and I pull it to the point where it will look good, right? And then I put another pin end and wrap my ends around it in a figure of 8 yet again, and that will give me then exactly the right length it needs to be, and then I start spreading out my gathers. And it's not overly gathered, and because I'm using the straight edge here to sew on, and the curved edge stands out, it gives you a very voluminous flutter anyway. It's really nice. I think sometimes they overdo it a little bit with the flutters. I think this is perfectly adequate. In fact, I think it's really nice. If it's too much, it just looks homemade, I think. Beautiful, right? Now we can sew this in, but we must make sure that we have a clean edge here. That's what I was just saying to you. You need to put it on a centimeter off, so that we don't have a rough edge of the binding showing, right? So make sure that you do that. Just pull it over. That's perfectly fine. Secure your stitches. And now we're sewing foot width really. On a lot of this stuff I've done foot width instead of a centimeter because it makes no difference. The only time it really makes a difference if you make a garment that's, you know, like a fitted pair of trousers or a ball dress or something. When you're making something that has elastic in the back in the first place, or the strap is like a few millimeters wider or less wide, it really doesn't matter at all. So you can just use foot width if you like. A lot of people find it easier to line up their fabric with a presser foot, and in fact I do too for stuff like this. And when I sew on my own without making instructions, I don't notice when I swap, and then when I do it and I do my voiceover like I do now, and I look at what I'm doing, I'm thinking, yeah, you're doing foot width again, aren't you, Marina? You're not doing the centimeter you worked this out for, but it looks wonderful both ways. So make sure anyway that none of your little ruffles turn in on themselves. That was only an issue for me here because, like I said, you know, I had all those loops underneath it, and my upper thread wasn't really as tight as it should be because that holds it together. And so there you go. Next step is to remove all your gather threads, make it nice and neat. Looks really good now. And some people will just pick this up now and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to pin this, right? I'm just going to take my fabric and I'm going to turn it in and pin it now. And what you will inevitably end up with is an uneven front, which may even have a little bit of excess here. So don't skip the ironing. Go over to your ironing board. I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, over to the ironing board, really pull it out and then give it a jolly good press. You can do that over your sleeve ironing board so that you maybe don't iron on your ruffles straight away. We will steam them down because they look nicer, but not at this point. So make sure that you have a really nice edge there. And now I turn in my seam allowance just so it hits that stitch line that you can see from the seam. You don't want it to go massively over, you want to be just on that stitch line. Otherwise, it'll, again, from the inside, it won't look so nice. Nobody's going to see the inside either. So, I mean, I wouldn't kill myself over it, you know. I wouldn't have a headache over it, but yeah. Good press, pin it all the way to the end. And here at the end, now we've got that clean edge. So you can fold it in and over and pin it. Or at this point, you could pop on over to your sewing machine and sew it in. And I'm going to show you that as well. I just move it over a little bit. Make sure it looks pristine. And that's all fine. So I've done this one now, all looking good. And now here I want to show you just what you could do if you don't want to do that. So just fold it in on itself and sew down here, and that gives you a really nice edge as well. I'm just going to quickly do that. And it's preference really. If you've got your sewing machine right there, you might as well do that because it'll give you a clean edge. I don't think one is nicer than the other, to be fair. So now we can go on to be sewing our front. See you there.